It's kind of a habit I try to develop. And um, when it comes to reflecting, there's kind of 2 points I tend to really focus on that I think kind of help guide me in how I try to view the year and how I try to prepare for the next year. And one of the things that I found that I always really helps is I try to put kind of my life in context of the way the world is, the way history is, and it always makes me very, very grateful. And I find that I'm very grateful to be alive in this time of history, to be able to have kind of lived without having to be in war or to be kind of trapped in poverty or to be kind of just in a world where it's a much rougher world if we look at history and a much more tragic, and it still is. And yet somehow we live in a part of the world where we can have relative peace, right? And it really is a blessing, and it really is actually, compared to history, unusual, right? To not have to go to war, not to have killed someone else by the time I'm my age, right? So it's something I'm very grateful for. Not only that, but also what I consider the merits of the age of two parents is the expansion of technology and the, deeper understanding of science, and especially the health sciences where, diseases that used to just kill people now are just minor inconveniences, right? It's quite a miracle, actually, if we really stop and think about it, right? So in many ways, I'm very grateful. Right? I feel like that's almost an accident. Like I didn't do anything to be able to benefit and be really blessed from the time I was born and the place I was born, right? So it also gives me kind of a sense of indebtedness to how this was built and created. So that context really makes me grateful, and I feel that helps me to understand kind of who I am and what I should do and how I should live my life. And the other part of that context is really my life of faith. It's something, of course, I'm going to be reflecting on every year and thinking about in the future, because faith is really what determines our kind of day-to-day decisions, right? Without, faith kind of outlines how we should get married, who we should get married to, how we deal with marriage, how we deal with tragedy. All those things are so interconnected into what we believe. And it's not just like big decisions, but even little decisions we make when we're interacting with people, when we're going through a difficult time. They're all impacted by what we believe, right? So what we believe really really is important in ways maybe when we're not thinking about it, when we're not reflecting on it, we just kind of take for granted or we overlook, right? So the first kind of focus of my reflection is this gratitude. And the second one is this life of faith, which is part, I think, kind of spins off from, I'm very grateful to have this faith, right? I'm very grateful to have this sense of purpose and direction, to be alive at this time with two parents, right? But so what I think about it when I'm reflecting on my life of faith is what makes our faith unique, right? What makes it different? What makes it special? Because it's not just like I pick one faith or it's the faith I was born with, and then that's the one I like because it's the easiest, right? To me, it's very important that it's something I actually believe because it makes such a difference, because it impacts so many decisions, So, I often joke that, maybe I'd become a Mormon if I had a different faith, right? but not just Mormons, there's other faiths. I think the Baha'i is also a very nice faith when I've spent some time to study it. So what is it about like my faith that's unique? And for me, in this time of year, something I reflect on a lot, I really think about, because I feel it's so important. So what makes my faith unique? Because it impacts my purpose, it impacts my decision, it impacts the direction, I move my life in. So for me, it's this gratitude and this uniqueness that I really focus on when I'm reflecting. And so again, in my faith, the point that I think is really the most unique, the kind of core of what I believe our faith is this character of God being a kind of perfect harmony of male and female, right? I feel that that's kind of the core element of our faith. It's the core element of what we believe and how the principle kind of explains God, explains our relationship to God, our value, our purpose as children to a parent, right? So from this starting point of God as being a heavenly parent, as we say now, it really becomes, explains the first blessing, the second blessing, the third blessing. The first blessing is our own kind of connection to God and how we're relating to God and how we're children of God, and God's heart is to love us and see us happy and to have a relationship with God. And then obviously the second blessing is really this unity of the male and female elements in an ideal world. We're coming together as a couple to really represent. And to me, it creates kind of such clarity. And in the Hundake, I kind of called out where Christianity is very confused on this point, right? And we can kind of see the consequences in the way the Christian world has evolved, and the way the Christian, let's say, leadership and the way Catholicism kind of managed the faith in the direction of the faith. So for me, that's always been a very, very important element of the principle in my own life of faith, is this equality of God, this balance of this perfect harmony between male and female, or yin and yang, right? And so the reason I think it's very important for us to be able to differentiate like what makes our faith unique, right? Because again, our faith is what basically determines how we live our lives. The things we believe impacts every small and big decision that we make. So it's so kind of crucial and core. So for me, this becomes the kind of core part of my faith, this balance of male and female, right? Men and women. And I try to, when in my relationship with my wife, I'm trying to live this way, trying to understand how do we balance each other the right way. Like we do disagree, there are things that we struggle with. So how do we find that perfect balance, right? And that kind of guides then how I try to resolve certain issues, right? So the reason I'm bringing this up today to kind of share with everyone is connected very much to the Hundake, and also why I picked that Hundake, because I was looking for something around True Mother, and Father's talking about True Mother, Father talking about the only begotten daughter. And it was only, there wasn't very many, the way I do it is I go on the search on unification.net, search in a term, see what comes up. So there wasn't very many results. It's not like Father was talking about the only begotten daughter all the time. But I did find the 1959 speech, which I thought was really telling and really kind of a powerful prediction, right? Where Father, the one line in that first reading was Father saying, this is what the fights in the Unification Church will be about in the future, right? And we can kind of see that playing out now since Father has passed. right? There's always been some struggles in our church history, right? There's been bumps in the road. There's been things that some of the true children have done or said. There have been some breakaway movements, some spiritualists who claimed that Father failed and they were the Messiah, right? But none of them really became schisms, right? Until Youngil kind of opposed Mother and separated, and then Youngil, right? So it was kind of very prophetic in that way, kind of understanding the challenge of Mother claiming responsibility for the providence. And I guess I was always a little bit frustrated that people, I think it was very natural. I think it was very obvious, but people, when they looked at your parents, they saw mostly Father, right? What I often say is that Father's like 80% true parents and maybe Mother's 20%. And that's how I think a lot of members saw it, right? I remember when I was in Korea, the Koreans used to say, true parents said this or true parents said that, right? But they were referring to Father. They weren't referring to Mother. Father had said it. And in one way, that's nice because you can kind of say, well, couples united. So if Mother says something, it's true parents. If Father says something, it's true parents. But I think in reality, it reflected more this idea that Father is true parents or mostly true parents, right? So it was very, so I knew a lot of people that went over to H1. It was very frustrating for me to see that because I felt like it came down to this challenge of not seeing Mother as equal, but somehow like less, and very unbalanced with it, right? And again, coming back to this core principle that the true parents should be 50-50, right? It should be perfectly balanced and perfectly in harmony, right? So, so now, again, kind of what instigated this hunduke and this service was the kind of, we have the Champu Moron coming out, right? It's something we're gonna have to study together as a community next year. But already there's kind of lots of rumors. There's kind of a lot of contradictory messages coming out. I've actually had a few conversations and asked some of the leaders about it. And the truth is, they're not sure yet what's being said that's true and what's kind of being made up. So it's very confusing right now. It's kind of a cloud of rumors and people teaching different things. So in some ways, the rollout is a bit disorganized, let's say, right? So again, when this kind of stuff happens, I really feel like, well, then what's the core principle that I believe, right? And it does, I think, for me, again, come back to this point that Mother should be completely equal to Father. Mother should never be seen as less than Father, because that will impact, like Christianity, having only Jesus, that'll impact our movement for the next 100 years, 1,000 years, right? However long it takes to actually have an ideal world. Hopefully it's shorter rather than longer. So Mother's equality to Father is so important for me, for my faith, for how I view principle. And so I feel like what might be happening is that because Father was 80 and Mother was 20, people are overcorrecting, right? And so now Mother's 80 and Father's 20, right? Because she's the one that's there, she's the one that's alive, she's the one we can see, right? Where most of us aren't spiritually open, we don't have a connection anymore to Father. And so in a way, that might be a natural way things go. But I think a lot of that might be cultural, right? I feel there's a tendency for, we can say that the Asian culture is much more vertical, right? And they like authority and they're good at understanding authority, following authority, serving the leader. Westerners are much worse at that, right? I'd say the Irish more.
Different, not worse.
Yes, sorry. which is a very good correction. Thank you, James. But the Western culture has a very different view of authority.
Take individual responsibility.
Yeah, yeah. And so I think something that Western culture can understand much more easily, much more naturally, is this idea of equality, this principle of God's harmony between male and female. And so I think in this time, right, where we're kind of in a transition and mother's leading the providence, right? I think there's a very good role that we can play in helping to kind of create that balance in how we view true parents. That we view true parents as co-messiahs, right? That they're equally God's son and God's daughter, right? Because that's the model, that's the ideal that God had when he created Adam and Eve, right? So it's, none of this is, an easy fix or, snap our fingers and everything's fine. But I think we always do influence each other. I think, when mother says something, just like when father said something, it goes through many filters before we hear it, right? Then this leader takes it and interprets it one way, and this other leader interprets it another way, and then it's written down, and then there's the translation. And even when it's written down, it might be modified a bit, right? So at the end of the day, our life of faith is our own. We have to be responsible for it. We have to understand what God is trying to tell us, what your parents are trying to tell us, right? Yeah. Okay, sorry. So it's a very important element, right, in how we live our life of faith. But I just felt, when I looked up father talking about mother, I felt these two speeches were really direct, but also really comforting for me, because father was saying so clearly that this principle, I believe, that there has to be complete unity, right? Complete harmony, complete balance between male and woman, right? So for me, true parents really have to be 50% father, 50% mother, right? And that, I think that's just difficult because of the way the world has been, the difference in age, the way father lived his life and then came onto the scene. So we kind of have this natural period now where we have mother's leading the providence. She obviously has to take charge. She's the one we can see physically and interact with, giving instructions. And hopefully, she lives a long time. Hopefully she breaks records for longest woman alive, but realistically, like, she could die tomorrow. She's quite old, right? So again, at the end of the day, it's actually, to Colin's point, Colin made a point about maybe Western culture is more also about individual responsibility. And that's also very true. And I think it's very relevant to how we live by the principle. That we also have to be responsible. And, ultimately, we're supposed to become true parents as well, right? We shouldn't be relying on mother and father to do it. We need to figure out how our own couples are 50% true father and 50% true mother, resembling the dual characteristics of God. So I wanted to end the year on kind of that reflection, because I feel like I'm kind of preparing for next year. Next year we have this big event in April. There's going to be, workshops and discussions and presentations about Champu Moran. And, I feel like it's important that we remember, the core of the principle, what makes us unique, what makes us who we are in our life of faith, right? And at least for me, when I think about that, when I reflect about it, it always comes back to the nature of, right? The nature of God is perfectly in balance, right? And I think that's what we have to try to be, right? On an individual level, in our families, and then kind of on a global community level as well. And I think we actually can influence that and have a part to play. And I think that's something I've actually been trying to do the last few weeks. I've been talking, like I said, I talked to, Reverend Hannah, who's kind of the North region leader. I've been asking him to clarify some things, um, I want us to be united in this effort, right? To really understand how we live as principled people and as God's children. So those are kind of my end of year reflections, and I'm very grateful everyone came today and joined via Zoom. So I will close there with the prayer. Everyone can join me